The first intermediate period is marked primarily by a rise in the authority of provincial administrators of distinct areas, and a decline in the power of the central government at Memphis. The great structures of the Old Kingdom on the scale of Giza's pyramids were no longer constructed within the first intermediate period because there was no strong central sovereign to order and pay for them, and no administration to coordinate the large workforce. The cultural image that comes from a study of historical data does not support a chaotic, dark era, but rather a different social and political model than what had come before. There is some historical evidence for the claim of unrest and claimed disorder, which stems from the absence of a single powerful central government. The country's different regions were essentially self-governing. The dearth of information about the kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties attest to their ineffectiveness. Their identities and dates will be forgotten in Egyptian annals. The ancient city of Memphis was abandoned at some time by rulers who saw themselves as the heirs of the Old Kingdom kings. The rulers of the 9th and 10th dynasties then seized Heracleopolis as their center and declared themselves Egypt's real kings. Intef, a Theban nomarch who bore the customary epithets of Great Overlord, of the Nome, and Overseer of Priests, came to prominence in Thebes around 2125 BC and opposed the authority of Heracleopolitan kings. Intef I established Egypt's 11th dynasty and provided the push for the country's unity. During the Middle Kingdom, he was known as Intef the Mighty, and a monument in his honor was erected in the Temple of Karnak. And this was the way leading to the beginning of a new era, which was the Middle Kingdom. Although Mentuhotep II was known as the Second Menes, who united Egypt and ushered in the Middle Kingdom period, the road to that unity was laid out by Intef I and his successors. Mentuhotep I, approximately 2115 BCE, followed Intef I's path and conquered the neighboring nomes for Thebes, considerably increasing the city's stature and strength. His initiatives were carried on by his predecessors. Mentuhotep II used these early victories to ultimately beat Heracleopolis and then punish those nomes who had stayed faithful to the old kings while rewarding those who had honored Thebes. Mentuhotep II devoted his time after the process of unity to the ruling, military accomplishments, and construction projects. Mentuhotep's successor, Mentuhotep III, reigned during 2010 to 1998 BCE, maintained and expanded his programs. He dispatched an army to Punt and strengthened the northern delta's borders. Mentuhotep IV replaced him. His entire 7-year rule is silent, but he most likely continued his predecessor's policies effectively because the nation is thriving when Amenemhat replaces him as monarch. When Amenemhat was Mentuhotep IV's vizier and was sent with his mission to quarry stones for the king's project, he had an inscription made of the extraordinary events he witnessed. First, a gazelle gave birth on the stone selected for the king's sarcophagus top, indicating that the stone had been chosen correctly because it was endowed with fecundity and life. Second, an unanticipated rainfall descended on the celebration, revealing a well big enough to water the entire gathering. This inscription was later interpreted to mean that Amenemhat was chosen by the gods to become king, as the gods had allowed him to experience miracles. Amenemhat I abandoned Thebes for unknown reasons and established his seat and court in Ititawi, south of Memphis. Amenemhat I's successor, Sennacherib I, 1971 to 1926 BCE, improved the country's infrastructure and initiated the kinds of grand building projects that had characterized the Old Kingdom and represented the king's power, including a temple to Amun at Karnak, which sparked the construction of the Great Temple complex there. Amenemhat I had followed in the footsteps of Intef II and Mentuhotep II by restricting the authority of local nomarchs and priests, and giving power only to those most trusted in the family. Sennaret I continued the same strategy. The administration of the 12th dynasty was so effective that, unlike the Old Kingdom, it kept wealth centralized with the monarch while allowing for the development and prosperity of individual regions, without allowing them to become too strong. The king governed all of Egypt, but specific officers were rewarded for their devotion. The Egyptians developed various advanced ways of irrigation systems, and to keep track of the water levels, they built nilometers to gauge the height of the flood and to determine the taxes levels supposed to be paid. Canals were dug to provide water to different areas when Sennaret II decided to turn the Fayum area into an agricultural center. He developed a specific irrigation system with a dike that transported water from Lake Moeris, which resulted in crop prosperity in the area. He was also behind the construction of the White Chapel, a building important to historians and academics because it contains a record of all the nomes of the period. Sennaret I was followed by Amenemhat II, 1929 to 1895 BCE, who may have governed alongside him. The practice of co-regency was unique to the Middle Kingdom, in which a younger man, the monarch's selected heir, usually a son, would govern alongside the king to learn the position and guarantee a seamless transfer of power. Scholars disagree on whether this practice was truly followed, though there is no question that it was followed by Amenemhat II and his successor Sennaret II, 1897 to 1878 BCE. Double dates for two rulers on official cartouches indicate co-regency. Amenemhat II's reign is little known, but Sennaret II is noted for his excellent ties with the regional nomarchs and improved prosperity of the nation. It's worth noting that during Sennaret II's rule, local officials thrived just as they had at the end of the Old Kingdom, but this did not cause the kingdom the difficulties that it had previously. Sennaret II was followed by Sennaret III, 1878 to 1860 BCE, the most potent monarch of the period, whose reign was so prosperous that he was deified during his lifetime. His rule is characterized by military advancement into Nubia, as well as a rise in Egypt's riches and influence. Sennaret III exemplified the Egyptian cultural value of military ability, and quick action was the pinnacle of the warrior king. He was thought to be unbeatable at the helm of his troops. His expeditions into Nubia widened Egypt's borders, and the fortifications he erected along the boundary facilitated commerce. He also conducted an expedition into Palestine, and as a result, trade ties with that area improved. And to control flood and direct irrigation waters, the ancient Egyptians built earth and stone barrages and dams, such as El Lahan Dam, which was erected during the reign of King Amenemhat III, who ruled in the 12th dynasty following the reign of Sennaret III, as he wanted to make good use of the floodwaters for the irrigation system, and to protect the state from destructive high levels of inundation water. Early November, before the water had entirely left the basins, was the time when preparations for planting season began. Before fields were prepared for planting, irrigation facilities were repaired or cleared, and property lines were reevaluated. And since ancient Egyptians were known to document every detail of their daily life, we have seen the process of growing and harvesting the grain depicted in great detail in various tombs paintings. Various crops were planted widely, which made food types plentiful in Egypt, such as emmer wheat, which was used to make bread and beer, grapes for wine, palm dates, doom palms, figs, sycamore, and papyrus, whose stems were used to make paper-like scrolls for writing, and also was a great material to make sails, cords, and even mats. Various tools were used by the farmers during the planting process, such as a very interesting one called shadaf. It's a hand-operated device used to lift water from the river, which consists of a long pole with a bucket hung on a rope from one end, and the other end has a weight attached to it. It was either used to fill jugs with water to transport them, or even to run water in small canals along ditches. However, it's normal when people wonder how such a civilization in ancient times managed to erect huge buildings and move colossal statues without having the technology we have in the current modern world. Some scenes from tombs of high officials have proof of how the whole process of moving huge statues was done. Jehudi Necht was a nomarch of the 12th dynasty. He used to govern the 15th nome of Upper Egypt. He has a very interesting scene in his tomb of the transportation of a roughly 6.8 meter high monument of him by 172 people using ropes and a slide, in an endeavor aided by the dumping of water in front of the slide. Unfortunately, no evidence of this colossus has ever been discovered. Amenemhat III boasted of no major military triumphs, but constructed almost as many monuments as his father and was responsible for the vast mortuary sanctuary at Hawara, known as the Labyrinth. Amenemhat IV, 1815 to 1807 BCE, replaced him and maintained his policies. He completed his father's construction tasks and began many of his own. During his reign, military and commercial expeditions were undertaken on numerous occasions, and trade thrived with towns in the Levant, particularly Byblos and elsewhere. The co-regency policy, if it was implemented, had guaranteed a seamless transfer of power from ruler to ruler, but it failed in the case of Amenemhat IV, who had no male successor to prepare for success. After his demise, the throne passed to his sister, or probably wife, Sobonefru, 1807 to 1802 BCE, whose rule is little known. Unless the Queen Nitocris of the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom is accepted as real, Sobonefru was the first woman to govern Egypt since the early dynastic period. The 12th dynasty concluded when she perished without an heir, and the 13th started with the reign of Sobekotep I, 1802 to 1800 BCE. The Middle Kingdom's 12th period was the most powerful and wealthy. The 13th dynasty would receive the riches and the policies, but would be unable to put them to good use. The 13th dynasty appears to have maintained the policies of the 12th dynasty monarchs and kept the nation united, but none of them had the personal power of the previous kings, according to incomplete documents. Lower Egypt started to develop its political groups.